Hello guys, Tony Torres here with Defense Lab Tactical, Defense Lab TNT in Arlington, Texas, and Edge Protection Systems. Today I want to talk about the ground rules. That's right, we're going to talk about what most people consider ground fighting and how it applies for real self-defense, not only for civilians, but some little specific details for law enforcement and military guys. So the first thing is just a term that I prefer to use is non-bipedal fighting, and it's a little bit fancy and a little bit convoluted, but you'll get my meaning when I start describing it, because most people think of ground fighting as being horizontally on the ground with some other dude or attacker on top of you or underneath you, etc. Where I think it's important to understand that there are things that can happen in the dynamic and the craziness of a fight where you might end up just kneeling on the ground or on your butt on the ground or reclining. So there's a few positions that you might end up in that don't quite fall into the category of what most people see as ground fighting. So I call it non-bipedal. That means that not your both of your feet are not touching the ground. Sometimes it could be a knee, it could be at the side of your body, etc. You could be on all fours sometimes. Again, a lot of the dynamics of a real fight will take the fight to different crazy places, and it's better to be prepared and understand how to fight from those positions rather than have it surprise you when it does happen. The first thing that I want to cover is the big paradox of ground fighting or training, which is this. In a real fight, you want, as much as you possibly can, avoid being on the ground, being non-bipedal, being on your knees or in your butt or anything like that. However, one of the best ways to avoid going to the ground is getting really good at ground fighting and fighting on your knees and fighting on your butt, fighting on your side, etc. So that's the first part of the paradox. It's kind of like a little spiral. Now, the problem is that sometimes, especially with arts like Jiu-jitsu and submission grappling and things like that, sometimes when we practice that too much, or I should never say too much, when we practice that to a certain level, we end up kind of falling in love with it. And sometimes there's that back program saying that we want to go to the ground, when a lot of times it's probably not the best idea to go to the ground. So you have to get, that's the spiral. In order to avoid ending up on the ground in a real fight, whether it's in your home or on the street, wherever the fight takes place, it's better to get really good at ground fighting. But a lot of ground fighting training can be, unless we put it in the right context, a lot of ground fighting training can end up becoming a dogma for you, or a program in the back of your brain that says, my answer to this is to go to the ground. My answer to this is to go to the ground. So you want to balance that. You always want to put the ground fighting training into some context so that you don't, a strategy that's very useful doesn't become a dogma by showing up at the wrong time. What I want to get into is how do we train intelligently? How do we do things? How can we prioritize our training so that we are receiving the best bang for our buck? So when it comes to ground fighting, the order that you want to kind of structure your training is: first, train to avoid getting grounded or non-bipedal in any way, shape, or form. So we want to learn how to have a good dynamic base. There are really good ways to develop that. Professor Dave Kama learned from Hicks and Gracie. One of the biggest things is dynamic base. Being able to have a way in which you can stand and have mobility without ending up getting taken to the ground, unless it's your choice to take the fight to the ground. So it's a dynamic base is very important. You have to develop that. The next thing is you want to understand how to stop any type of tackle or counterattack tackles, learn how to avoid any type of lifting motions an opponent might apply to you, and you want to also learn how to deal with shoves and, of course, takedowns, when people are grabbing at your legs, double legs, single legs, and things like that. How to avoid and counter a lot of those throws in a way that you do not end up on the ground. Next is learning dynamic ground engagement. Now, a lot of people practice break falls, but that's not enough. I mean, if you're taking a jiu-jitsu class or a judo class and they're teaching you how to break fall, take that into consideration. It is good to learn those standard falls, but more importantly, you want to learn what's called dynamic ground engagement. In the craziness of a fight, you're not going to fall as cleanly as you do when you're practicing your break falls. So you want to make sure that you have a protocol in place that teaches you how to engage the ground while maybe somebody's still holding on to you. You want to learn how to protect your head. That's the most important thing, is protecting your head. If you feel that you're going to the ground, there are ways to train yourself to make sure that your head is protected once you feel that you're losing your balance. It's very important. If you hit your head on something solid, you can get knocked out. And remember what I always say, after unconsciousness, there's no next move. So, that's the end of that fight. So staying conscious is a high priority. So you have to learn how to protect your head during this dynamic ground engagement. A lot of times you have to learn how to catch your body on your shoulders, on your buttocks, on your thighs, and different ways to engage with the ground. And as a matter of fact, some things that are absolutely no-no when you're breaking falls or when you're kind of falling accidentally, it's perhaps the only thing that might save you when you're falling to the ground and there's another person involved. You may have to risk damaging your wrist a little bit or breaking something in order to avoid having your cranium hit the pavement. So you have to take all of those things into consideration. The next thing you want to learn is grounded survival against when you're on the floor and your adversary is still standing up. That is crucial to understand how to move, how to get back on your feet, and we're going to get into that in a second. But you want to be able to survive an attacker that's standing and has all his basic mobility while you're still on the ground. And you want to, of course, move on to the next part, which is learning simple and effective ways and safe ways to get back up. Some of those are done. You see it in jiu-jitsu where you learn the what most people call a technical get up. I like to call it a tactical get up. There are also ways to get up while you're near some sort of barrier like a wall or a car and things like that. There are ways to use your opponent to help you get up depending on the context of what you're trying to do. So you have to learn some quick and safe ways to regain your feet, which is a big priority in real encounters when you end up on the ground. Next big item that you have to figure out or you have to train on is learning how to survive strikes while you're on the ground and mostly while you're on the bottom position. Somebody's on top of you, they're going to be raining blows, they're going to perhaps reach for a weapon. So for the law enforcement guys and military guys, you also have to learn some weapon retention skills, weapon protection skills from those positions. But in general, covering everybody should learn how to avoid and counter and defend yourself properly from strikes while you're grounded or on the bottom of a grounded engagement. So that includes if the guy is standing up or if the guy is in any of the positions that involve, what most people call like side control or cross sides, whether they're mounted on you and such, where they have you on a headlock. All those positions, you have to learn how to protect yourself from blows. And again, mostly blows to the head. You can take a blow to the body here and there, but most importantly is staying conscious. So we have to make sure that we can protect our head. The next thing you want to start working on is several different, I shouldn't say several, your most fundamental escapes and reversals from headlocks and other bottom positions. And I already addressed what those positions are. The mount, of course, if somebody's on your back, where you're facing the ground on your back, you have to learn how to reverse and escape from those positions. Next is obviously learn how to access your own weapons from those positions. If things are going, as my British friends like to say, pear-shaped, or you're losing control, there's a big danger that you may end up losing this fight terminally, then you might want to work on practicing how to access your own weapons, environmental weapons, or the weapons that you carry. And it could be a knife, gun, whatever you happen to carry with you. Lastly, and notice that it took all these other steps, then last thing you want to do is cover controlling someone from top positions on the ground and applying strikes or countering strikes, etc., or finishing the fight through a choke or an arm break or anything like that. That's the last thing. So all the important things, or the most important things, has to do with you being in the bad position. First, trying to avoid going to the ground. Once you've covered all the different ways that you can avoid going to the ground, then you want to learn all your different survival skills on the ground. And lastly, how to change positions while we're on the ground. Eventually, how to control, how to take advantage of the ground when you're on top, and how to control or finish the fight. That is a basic template. So we had 8 different skill sets to develop there, and 3 main areas, which is survival, reversal, and finally engagement. But those 3 areas are covered in specifics in those 8 bullet points that I just gave you on how to structure your training. Some considerations and some contrasting that I want to do here between if you're a law enforcement guy or a military guy that's training, hopefully you're training good jiu-jitsu if you can find it in your area. And good jiu-jitsu, that means self-defense based jiu-jitsu. I've spoken about that at length in other videos. You got to make sure that the school that you're learning jiu-jitsu covers all your stand-up self-defense, covers how to defend yourself from strikes, clinch, takedowns, etc. You want to make sure that all your different bases are covered. Some of the priorities change for your training if you're a military or law enforcement guy. So one of the biggest things is we want to place a lot of focus in how do we control the subject's hands. No matter where we are in this, and this also applies to self-defense in general, there is a tendency to sometimes focusing on getting to the best position possible on the ground, and sometimes on the way there we lose track of where the hands are, and that's the opportunity for an adversary to either grab our weapon if we happen to have one, or reach for their own weapons, etc. So I always recommend in law enforcement training or military training, while you're doing your ground fighting, always have that little program running in the back of your head going, where are the hands? Am I controlling, monitoring the hands? Is this position, allow me to control the suspect's hands or the enemy's hands? And can he reach for a weapon, or can he reach for my weapon? Those things. So you want to start prioritizing that in your training if you're concerned with real self-defense that applies to law enforcement, military, or, like I said, it applies in real street altercations or home invasions, etc., for civilians as well. Another little contrast that I like to bring up between standard jiu-jitsu training and things that are more important for self-defense or law enforcement or military context is if I were to have somebody in my guard, let's say close guard or open guard, doesn't matter, I remember one of my former teachers used to say that you should try to submit the person first as quickly as you can. Then you want to try to reverse the person or sweep the person and get on top. And then if that doesn't work, you want to like get up and break distance or whatever and continue the engagement from another position. And I don't think that for the self-defense scenarios, that's the best protocol. If I have somebody in my guard for whatever reason in a street fight, whether I'm just fighting a civilian military guy or the law enforcement guy, if I were, and again, there I go using the term that I don't like, street fight, in an assault that it's a real violent attack, whether it happens on the street, in the parking lot, in my house, it doesn't matter. I want to prioritize a little bit different. I want to try to get up and get on top first. So I'm gonna, and there are ways to train this. We cover those in the Defense Lab tactical curriculum, and there's other people that cover it as well. But the important thing is to get up from that position first so that I may be back on my 2 feet, continuing this engagement. Then if I cannot find a way to maneuver myself to a standing position, then I want to reverse so that at least I'm on top. I'm in the better position of this ground fight. So the first thing is I want to end the fact that this is a ground fight, or if it's a ground fight, I want to make it so that I'm in the advantageous position. I'm the guy standing and my opponent or my enemy is on the floor. And then lastly, if I cannot find a way to get up or a way to reverse the positions, then I want to start considering getting to my weapons and applying chokes and things of that matter. So priorities, priorities, priorities. And the reason for that is in a real altercation, I don't know how long I have before his buddies start showing up and before all these things start going sideways. So I want to make sure that in my brain, there's always that program running that's saying, I have to get up. I cannot stay down here all this time. Remember the paradox of training, though. In order to be able to do that, you have to train a lot of real ground fighting. And then you're able to work all these other things out. Now, the last bit of information I want to cover on this video is this, or the last big contrast. There is no such thing as a submission in a street fight. You're going to go for subduing your opponent, not submitting the opponent. You want to subdue your opponent, or at least you want to train to be able to subdue an opponent. And here's the difference. Submission is something that somebody volunteers to at some point. So you're applying a choke and the guy gives up and says, please, please, no more. And then you let him go or whatever. You're trying to, you're applying some sort of arm break. It could be you're pummeling his face, you're bashing his face in, you're elbowing, whatever it is. And the person says, oh, I submit, I submit. And that is crucial. That is a voluntary act from the person that you're applying this pain or pressure or whatever it is to. You want to be prepared to subdue somebody. That means if you apply that choke, you have to apply it till they're unconscious. If you're going after breaking an arm, you have to break that arm and hope, and I shouldn't say hope. Hope is never a good thing in a street fight. But when you're applying, you're breaking an arm or wrenching a shoulder or anything like that, you want to make sure that you actually do that and you repeat it as frequently as you have to till that person is unable to continue to fight. That is the difference between subduing and submitting. Submitting is something that the other person does, He goes, I submit, I give up, no more. And that's fine. If they submit, great. However, you want to be prepared to have to continue this fight until you subdue that person. Cool? All right, as always, please, I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to the channel. Send me any questions you have, put it down in the comments, or you can message me on Facebook, Tony Torres. You can message me at Defense Lab Tactical, Defense Lab TNT in Arlington, Texas, or the Edge Protection Systems page. You can reach at me. You can call me 520-236-2436. I'd love to hear from you, any questions you may have, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks.